Okay, hi everybody. I'm going to try and go through my video relatively quickly this week. I know last couple weeks actually, we've kind of been running a little long here, so I'm going to try and keep it a little shorter this time, instructional wise, especially because I'm doing grades this week, and that Persepolis work is lagging a little bit behind, just a tad. Um, we are coming up on the end of our work. Next week will be the end of our journey with this novel. We're going to kind of wrap it up there. So I do need you guys to kind of stay diligent. Like I said, I'm going to update grades this week. So please make sure to get stuff turned in so that way I can go ahead and get it all graded up and submit it for you and stuff. Have enjoyed the discussions that have been happening. Uh, Wish that there were a bit more, but I'm not going to complain a whole lot. We're going to do what we're going to do. Um, Today, so last time we talked about punk rock and this kind of cultural element that we could pull out of Persepolis, or at least find in there, and how we can kind of see the ethos of that culture being embedded in this work, right? Now I want to look a little bit at some philosophy that a lot of the times whenever I work on teaching students critical theory and things like that, I run into this brick wall where kids like, I don't think that's actually there. I think that you're reaching too far. I think that you're reading too much into stuff. But Persepolis actually makes it very easy for us to kind of do a kind of Marxist take on this, because she specifically talks about Marx by name and talks about communism by name, and like specifically talks about the idea of like social classes and class structure as one of the elements that's being addressed in this novel. So I want to take a moment and kind of look at how, at some specific ways that these things are explored in the novel explicitly. So that way, coming up soon, you guys have got this. There's this individual oral assessment for the chorus where you have to talk about a global issue, an issue that applies all over the world, so on and then so forth, and how a piece of text deals with that. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give you resources or ideas to help you kind of do that, right? And so this is kind of going to be one of those ways that you could maybe pull from this text if you wanted to. So let me make myself small here real quick. And like I said, I'm going to try and go through this relatively quickly. I don't think anybody wants to have to listen to me talk for too terribly long. I'm going to make myself pretty small here tonight because we got some pictures that I'm going to want you to be able to see. So, ooh, besides, look at my giant moon face. Nobody wants to see that. I glow, man. Wow. All right, hold on. Okay, so we're gonna drop some big ideas here. So, in literature, there are these critical theory approaches. These lenses that you can kind of look at a text through, right? And that's things like feminism, or queer theory, or Marxist theory, or psychoanalytical theory, or structuralism, or deconstructionist theory, and there are these critical lenses. And basically, what it does is you are now going to read the text with these glasses on that have a certain color on them, and it's going to make those things that are that color pop out even more. And that means that you're going to miss some of the things that are the other colors, right? Because you're not looking for those. What you're looking for specifically are things that fit this lens that you're looking through. So the lens that I want to talk about today, the way of approaching the text that we're going to talk about today, is Marxist theory. And Marxist theory is all about the conflicts between social classes, um, and between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, also known as the rich people and the working people, the people that own the means of production, the people that own the factories, and the people that work in the factories. Right? The people up here own the factories, and therefore they own the stuff that the factories make. The people down here work in the factories and actually make all this stuff, but they don't get to own any of it. Right? That's the whole Marxist idea here. And we're going to get into a couple of so materialistic dialectics are this idea that all of reality are the things that we can see and touch and know, and that this material world is all of reality, and it is independent of us completely. And that means like independent of the spiritual realm, independent of the supernatural, that just the world is the world, and the world is what we can see and touch. It is the material of the world, and that material is constantly changing. All right, that there are these constant changes, and that every time that something changes, it makes a new conflict. And these new conflicts are the basis of all progression for all of reality, right? And so, from a human level, that looks like social class, right? So, as new technology arises, only the rich can afford it, right? And so, like, let's say that like new health technology happens, right? So let's use our imaginations. All right, let's say that we invent a way to stop aging. Right, we invent a way to freeze your age. Right, so what we know is that when that technology first becomes available, when it is first invented, it's going to be very expensive. Right, so it's this new development, it's this new thing in the cycle, right? But now it's only available to the very rich. Well, that causes conflict, because what it means is that the very rich now will never age and they will never die, which means that they will always, which means that they will keep on acquiring more and more and more wealth. They will never die to pass that wealth on to anybody else or recirculate it into the system. It will just kind of stay there with them forever. And because they don't age, they will always be here. And the underclass people are still dying, and they are never able to hit the top of that cycle because they started down here. And so now that creates conflict between the class systems. So this new technology, this new development, then leads to this new cycle of tensions, right? And so in this idea, all right, in this Marxist framework, where you're looking for these conflicts, for these social class conflicts, for these cultural conflicts, for this cycle also of like new ideas, new perspectives lead to conflicts between people that like the new and like the old, and they come into conflict, and somebody is going to win and somebody is going to lose, right? But then eventually there will be other new ideas and then other new conflicts, and this cycle will constantly continue. And whether whether that's around wealth, or whether it's around the way that we think that like society should be ran, there are these constant circuitous conflicts, right? So in the chapter, the letter, right, we see Marjorie start to become kind of aware of some of these conflicts, right? So she starts to realize that like there are these different people that are working and have different lives than her, and different lives than she even thought was like possible. And she starts to realize that like her existence is different from their existence, and this causes a dissonance for her, right? And so, for instance, in this frame, right, so like we see this guy start carrying packages at the age of like 10, and Layla wove carpets at 5, and then Hassan was cleaning car windows at 3. And what was Marjorie doing? Marjorie is sitting in her father's Cadillac, right? And this, right, is the first time that she feels shame, because she realizes that the revolution is really about social class as much as it is about any other kind of like ideology. That underpinning all of this, she believes, is this kind of like wrongness, right? And so she understood why she feels ashamed to sit in her father's Cadillac, because while like she lives in this upper bourgeoisie existence, she realizes that there are 3-year-olds washing car windows, right? And so, you know, and so this social class and this conflict and the dissonance that this is like causing is kind of the root of this Marxist theory. So later in this same chapter, Marjorie really struggles to Marjorie really struggles with the idea that people are defined by their social classes. She is really struggling with the idea that social classes define a person, right? And so part of that is because she sees people for like who they are. One thing that you can say about Marjane is that she's a very sensitive person, even as a child. Um, and so she is starting to see these people for like who they authentically are, but then she realizes that there's a social construct that separates them from her and from these people that like she like cares about, even though from her perspective it is like artificial, right? And so in this chapter we get this exchange between her and her father, where her dad is telling her, look, they could never actually make their relationship work because in their country and in their society you can't have a relationship with somebody that's not a part of your social class. And then we get this like really heartbreaking frame here where she's like, well, why is that her fault? How does that have anything to do with who she is as a person? She was just born against this. And then she asked her dad, how do you feel about this? And then we have this line, we were not in the same social class, but at least we were in the same bed. Meaning that like she doesn't buy into this idea of this social class stratification. So how does this fit into our earlier idea of the cycles? Remember, so the social class is a construct of the old, and Marjane represents the new, right? And so she is the new upsetting the old, which is also reflected in the revolution which she is about to see, right? And then Marjane's family, as we find out later, also has some pretty radical political ideas themselves. So her family represents this conflict with the traditional establishment, and so it's this cycle, right? Right? It's this cycle of conflict. So then we get to this chapter of the bicycle, and really we are only looking at two chapters in this to really kind of look. We are looking at the letter, and then we're going to look at the bicycle. So intellectuals in Marxist theory, right? Their job was to create the frameworks for understanding reality that could convince the masses to rise up against the systems of oppression that kept them down. So Marx and like Engels were both intellectuals. They were both very very educated. They were both philosophers, and they believed that it was their job to find the language and to find the explanation for reality that could lead to liberation, right? And so the same thing happens in Persepolis whenever Marjane gets these books and these ideas come to her that start to give her her own internal revolution, right? And so she reads about the revolutionaries of her own country, but then she reads about the evolutionary leaders of like other places, right? And she wants to be Fidel Castro, and she starts to read about Marx and Che Guevara, right? And 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 so she thinks about these like revolutionaries and the job that they are doing. And it's not until later that she realizes that the revolutionaries in her country and the freedom revolutionaries that she looks up to from the Marxist movement, like Marx, like Engels, like Che Guevara, like Fidel Castro, are very different, because the revolutionaries that she's reading about from Iran are being written about from the current leaders of like Iran, writing about the people that have led to the regime that she is uncomfortable with. And so she sees the revolutionaries in her country this way, and like idealizes them, only to later realize that they do not live up, right? And so she talks about to enlighten me, they brought books, and I knew everything about the children of Palestine and Fidel Castro, who was a communist and very, very Marxist, and about the young Vietnamese killed by the Americans. They were communist. And then the revolutionaries of my country, right? And so basically, the literature that she is reading is trying to equate these Iranian revolutionaries with these Marxist revolutionaries, even though the Iranian revolution was not a Marxist revolution, it was a theocratic revolution. And Marx's theory and Marxist ideologies are actually pretty anti-religion as a whole. And then, but my favorite was the comic book entitled Dialectic Materialism, right? And we talked about this, right? Right? We just talked about the like dialectic materialism in the worldview, and in her comic book, Marx and Descartes debate, right? And Descartes is this other philosopher, and I don't want to get too much into him, but he's the cogito ergo sum guy, the I think therefore I am guy, the guy that believes that maybe material existence doesn't exist at all, but is only a projection of ourselves and our own minds. And Marx is the like complete opposite of that, right? And so she's saying that she became enamored with these conversations as like portrayed in these books between these two philosophers, right? And at one point, she like even compares Marx to God, right? And talks about how like in her mind Marx and God were so similar, right? She draws them looking the same. And as she begins to read more and as she begins to think more, she actually starts focusing much more on Marx than she does on her faith and on her religion. And this frame, I think, is important because in the frame of this narrative, we start to see her actually start to supplant politics and sociology for religion, right? And this is also the stance that many members of her family take. Her grandfather was a Marxist. Her uncle was a Marxist, and so she starts to supplant those, right? And so the people do not trust the Shah because of his close ties. So the Shah was in big trouble, as we've talked about before, because he ticks off the intellectuals who are more Marxist, and he ticks off the conservative theocrats and the conservative Islamists because he is very, very Western. So what he ends up doing is he ends up having no allies, right? But talking about this idea of the like revolution, the Shah is saying that Iran is going to get back everything that it has lost, but a lot of Iranians do not believe that because the Shah is so aligned with kind of Western society, and so the traditionalists see everything that Iran lost from the perspective of tradition and religion, right? And so that is one side over here, but then the intellectuals look at it from an economic and from a class standpoint, and they see it over here, and neither side likes the Shah, but they're also not working towards the same things either, right? And so again, it's this idea of this constant conflict. So even if they get rid of the Shah, well, what's going to happen now? Now you're going to have a conflict between these economically focused intellectuals and then the traditional Islamists in the society, who are then going to be at conflict with each other as well. And so she is kind of highlighting this all here, right? And so where we end up is she starts talking about the revolution as a cycle, right? And then she starts talking about the bicycle, right? Because cycle and bicycle, right? And so because she's into this Marxist idea that these revolutions are kind of cylindrical, she even says the revolution is like a bicycle. When the wheels don't turn, it fails, right? So the problem here is that the bicycle can only go in a certain direction if everyone in the society wants it to go in that direction. And she sees that in Iran, you've got these three. So you've got the Shah, you've got the Marxist and the classist intellectuals, and then you've got the Islamist and the traditional conservatives over here, and they all don't know which way to pull the country and this revolution. The Shah wants revolution to go this way, the classists and the Marxists want to go this way, and the traditional and the Islamists want to go this way. And she is kind of foreshadowing the fact that this is just going to be a constant cycle of conflict, that it's never going to actually end. So even after the revolution ends, Marjane realizes that the revolution will never actually conclude because it is just this cycle, that the wheel keeps on turning, right? All right, so um, and this is just one way of reading this. Again, there are whole sections in this novel where she talks to her relatives about their time in the Soviet Union, where she talks to her family members about Marxist ideas. This idea of class conflict and the working class versus the ruling class and the social constructs involved there and these conflicts. These are embedded throughout the work as a whole. I'm just giving you a couple specific examples that you could pull from to show the connection there, right? And really, these same ideas about the working people versus the ruling people are also ideas that are found in works like Kindred, right? Because essentially, right, that's also what slavery is. It's the working people versus the ruling people, only in a much more direct way because there's not even compensation involved in that relationship, right? And so the idea here is that these critical lenses give us a way to look at a text for very, very specific things. So maybe you want to look at it for the role of women, or maybe you want to look at it from a Marxist perspective and look at economics and social classes, or maybe you want to look at it for LGBTQ representation and what the book is saying in relation to LGBTQ rights, right? There are these specific lenses at which you can begin to look at a text, which in some ways help us, because sometimes when we try to look at a text in these really broad ways and in these really expansive ways, we kind of get lost because there's too much to consider. There's too much to take in. And so it becomes hard because it's so expansive. As where when we can focus in and when we can narrow our gaze for these very, very specific things, well, now we find it easier to talk about because we kind of have a starting point. And that's where these things can become helpful. So here's just one way that Persepolis is talking about one of these critical lenses, and there are many, 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 many. So, that's all I've got for this presentation. I did a good job of keeping it right around 20 minutes. Go me. Please work on getting these Persepolis assignments turned in. Like I said, I'm going to be doing grades this week. As always, up in the class folder are the assignments and the vocab list to help you. I've broken it up. The reading next week is going to be our last week with Persepolis. We're going to kind of wrap this whole thing up. This is the week where we get to see Marjane in the Western world and get to see her first encounters with Western life and Western socialization. It's good stuff. So anyways, as always, if you need anything, please let me know. Reach out to me through email or on Schoology. If you don't want to email me for whatever reason, please make sure to hit up the weekly discussion thread as well. All right, guys, take care.